No suit. No entourage. Just a black man in khakis, standing quietly at the counter of the very institution he created. They didn't check his ID. They didn't check his name. They just checked his skin. What they didn't know. He wasn't just a customer. He was the founder. And by the time they found out, it was too late. At exactly 8:45 a.m., the sun bathed the sleek, glass facade of Halstead Trust Bank in downtown Atlanta, casting golden reflections on its marble steps. Inside, the hum of quiet efficiency echoed through the spacious lobby, the soft beep of teller machines, the low murmur of polite conversations, the rhythmic tapping of polished shoes on tile. Elliot Grant stepped through the rotating doors wearing a pressed powder blue shirt tucked neatly into khaki slacks, and a pair of spotless white sneakers. He looked like any other professional starting his day, unassuming, well-groomed, and utterly calm. There was no designer briefcase in hand, no flashy watch on his wrist, and certainly no entourage behind him. To everyone watching, he could have been a high school teacher, a freelance writer, or a middle manager grabbing cash before a meeting. What they didn't see or didn't bother to was that Elliot wasn't just a customer. He was the founder of Halstead Trust. The very bank he had built from scratch. But today, Elliot wasn't here for a board meeting. No quarterly reports or strategy summits. Just a routine withdrawal, $15,000 from his personal checking account. The kind of transaction that should have taken 10 minutes tops. He moved toward the line, letting his eyes wander briefly across the room. It was just as he remembered: clean, modern, efficient. The scent of lavender from the front desk diffuser, the perfectly aligned brochures promoting inclusive wealth strategies, and the smiling photographs of senior staff lining the back wall. It was all part of the image, his image. A few steps ahead of him, a man, white, mid-50s, wearing a sleek charcoal gray suit, stood at the teller counter. The teller, a brunette woman with warm eyes and a quick smile, handed him several neatly stacked bundles of $100 bills. No clipboard. No raised eyebrows. No questions. As the man turned, Elliot's sharp eyes caught a glimpse of the receipt, $20,000 withdrawn. Not a pause. Not a second thought. He walked out, pockets full, untouched by suspicion. Elliot exhaled slowly, attention nodding briefly in his jaw before he relaxed it again. He had seen this before. Lived this before. But never in this building. Not in this space that bore his vision. The line moved quickly. In under 2 minutes, Elliot found himself in front of a teller whose name tag read Samantha Briggs. Blonde, mid-30s, blazer so crisply ironed it still held its hanger creases. But unlike her coworker just moments before, Samantha didn't greet him. Didn't smile. Didn't make eye contact. Without a word, she reached under the counter and slid a clipboard across the smooth granite surface. "Fill this out," she said flatly. No good morning, no how can I help you. Not even a glance of professional courtesy. Just a dry, mechanical instruction like he was applying for a parking permit instead of accessing his own funds. Elliot stared at her for a beat, then lowered his gaze to the form. A standard withdrawal slip. He said nothing, just nodded faintly and reached into his pocket for a pen. Fine. Procedure is procedure. He filled it out quickly and cleanly, then slid it back to her along with his driver's license. She picked up the clipboard but ignored the ID entirely. Her eyes flicked straight to the number $15,000 and, without a blink, shoved the form back across the counter. "We can't process this," she said, folding her arms. Elliot blinked, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in polite disbelief. "Excuse me?" She didn't flinch. "We don't handle large cash withdrawals like this." He frowned. "I just watched a gentleman walk out with $20,000 in cash." No hesitation. Samantha's lips tightened into a hard, pale line. "That's different." "Different how?" Elliot asked, his voice calm, tone even. Samantha didn't answer. Instead, her eyes flicked just for a second toward the sleek, glass-walled office near the rear of the lobby. Elliot followed her gaze. Inside the office stood a woman, arms folded, watching them intently through the tinted glass. A tailored suit. Cold, assessing eyes. A look Elliot knew all too well, not curiosity, not concern, but judgment, preloaded and ready to strike. Her name was Clarissa Monroe, branch manager. And Elliot instantly understood what game was being played. Again. Clarissa Monroe's eyes didn't waver as she stood behind the tinted glass. Her arms crossed tightly, her expression unmoved. She wasn't watching a customer, she was watching a situation unfold. A problem to be managed. Neutral, but not oblivious. And certainly not innocent. Elliot looked back to Samantha, who had now straightened her posture slightly, bolstered by the silent presence behind her. That fleeting glance from her manager had been all the permission she needed not to question, not to verify, but to stand firm in dismissal. "I told you," she said again, her voice now tinged with quiet defiance as she tapped the withdrawal slip resting on the counter. "We can't process this transaction." Elliot inhaled through his nose, slow and steady, fighting the all-too-familiar tide rising in his chest. "And I'm asking you why not?" Samantha's fingers began tapping the counter, not with anxiety, but rhythmically, like she was stalling. Or worse, playing a game she thought she had already won. She sighed, tilting her head slightly, a rehearsed customer service smile barely forming on her lips. "It's just unusual," she offered, as if saying it sweetly made it any less offensive. "A cash withdrawal of this size, it raises flags." Elliot let the word linger in the air. Unusual. That's what they always said. The polite vocabulary of discrimination. The corporate speak of coded bias. He'd heard it before as a young entrepreneur trying to secure his first business loan, as a man buying his first property in a neighborhood where neighbors peeked through curtains but never smiled. It was never, "because you're black." It was always, "It's unusual, we're just doing our due diligence, we have to check." He looked back at Samantha, his voice low and precise. "You didn't say that when the man before me walked out with $20,000. Her lips tightened again. "So, what's the difference?" A flicker of something crossed her face, doubt, maybe, or realization, but it vanished quickly as she shook her head. "Sir, I don't make the rules." Elliot gave a soft, dry chuckle. "No, but you sure know how to apply them." There it was. The moment where she flinched, just slightly. Where the mask slipped. "I need to get my manager," she said, suddenly curt. Her voice clipped and sharp. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel and disappeared behind the frosted glass door at the back of the lobby. Elliot remained still, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the counter, tapping softly to the beat of his rising pulse. The energy in the bank shifted. Something subtle, but palpable, like static in the air before a storm. He could feel eyes flicking toward him from across the lobby. Tellers paused, glancing his way, then quickly looking back at their screens. Customers fidgeted, shifting weight from foot to foot, pretending not to notice. But they noticed. A few feet away, a woman, white, maybe early 50s, stood near the customer service desk with a designer purse tucked neatly under one arm. Her name tag read Elaine Weller. She had paused mid-step, hands clasped tightly around the strap of her bag. Her eyes darted between Elliot and the hallway where Samantha had vanished. She looked like she was debating something, whether to speak, whether to look away, whether to say anything at all. Elliot met her gaze. She offered a soft, hesitant smile. Not out of kindness, but uncertainty. He didn't return it. Not because he was angry with her, but because he had no more patience for silent observers. He'd lived through too many moments like this. Watched too many people like her watch without action. Witness without consequence. A few seconds later, the frosted door opened again. Samantha stepped out, followed closely by Clarissa Monroe. Clarissa's heels clicked sharply against the tile. Her navy suit was perfectly tailored, her hair pulled back in a tight, professional bun. She carried herself like a judge about to deliver a verdict, not a manager here to help. She walked with confidence, the kind that comes from years of not being questioned. As she approached, Samantha's chin lifted slightly. She smirked, not arrogantly, but with the self-assurance of someone who believed she was right. Clarissa stopped directly in front of Elliot. Her expression didn't waver, her tone perfectly polished. "Good morning, sir," she said, with all the warmth of a scripted apology. "I understand you're attempting to make a large withdrawal today?" Elliot held her gaze. "I am." "Well," she began, her voice crisp, "we have certain security protocols in place for transactions of this size." Elliot tilted his head, arms now crossed. "Security protocols?" "Yes," she said, nodding slowly. "For the safety of our customers and staff, we're extra cautious with high-value cash requests." He didn't move. Didn't blink. "So, what does that mean exactly?" "For me?" Clarissa gave a polite, almost pitying smile. "It means we'll need to verify a few things before proceeding." Elliot narrowed his eyes just slightly, his arms still folded across his chest. The muscle in his jaw flexed as he kept his voice steady. "You'll need to verify my information?" he asked. "Because it seems like you didn't need to verify anything when the man ahead of me withdrew even more than I'm requesting." Clarissa didn't blink. "I can't speak to other customers' transactions. But you're speaking quite clearly about mine." There was a pause, not long, but sharp. The kind of pause that says everything without needing to say much at all. "In this case," Clarissa continued, "we'll need to confirm the source of the funds, and review your last deposit." Elliot raised an eyebrow, tapping a single finger against the counter. "You have my account number in front of you. Look it up." Clarissa's polite facade began to crack. Her smile flattened. "That's not how we do things here." Elliot gave a dry, humorless laugh, short and sharp. "That's interesting," he said, voice tightening. "Because I've banked here for years. And not once, not one single time have I been asked to confirm my last deposit or explain the source of my income." He took one step closer to the counter. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just steady. "So tell me, Clarissa, what exactly about me makes you think I don't belong?" Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. The kind that doesn't invite answers, only truth. Behind the counter, Samantha's eyes darted nervously toward her manager. She had started this, but now even she could feel the air thickening with tension, with a sense that they had gone too far. Clarissa didn't flinch. In fact, she almost looked amused. That's when it happened. Her eyes drifted just briefly past Elliot's shoulder, toward the front of the bank. Elliot didn't need to look to know what was coming. He felt it. The weight. The presence. The unspoken threat. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A man in a security uniform rising slowly from a stool near the entrance. Wade Peterson. Mid-30s. White. Built like a linebacker. A security guard whose posture alone said everything. "I'm in control before I even speak." Elliot didn't move. But he watched Wade begin his approach, slow and deliberate, like he was preparing for a disturbance that hadn't happened and wasn't going to. Clarissa didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her eyes had already given the order. Wade's heavy boots echoed with every step on the pristine tile. He wasn't running. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. Because in his mind, like in too many others, the simple fact of Elliot's presence, his calm defiance, his skin, was reason enough. When Wade finally stopped beside him, Elliot didn't look up. He simply took a slow breath, keeping his voice level. "Let me guess," he said quietly, you've been asked to escort me out. Wade didn't answer. Just stared, expression blank. Hands open and loose at his sides, but his body language screamed authority. Dominance. Clarissa finally spoke again, tone still syrupy smooth. Mr. Grant, I'm going to ask you one more time. Can you verify the source of these funds? Elliot turned toward her fully now, his voice colder than it had been all morning. My paycheck, he said. Just like every other time I've deposited money here. Clarissa's face didn't change, but Samantha flinched behind her. Something in the truth of that answer too clean, too obvious seemed to disturb even her practiced composure. And, Elliot continued, since you're looking right at my account number, I'll go ahead and suggest you verify my deposit yourself. Clarissa exhaled through her nose, jaw clenched tight. You're being uncooperative. No, Elliot said, raising his phone slowly and unlocking the screen. I'm being recorded. The camera faced up, nothing dramatic, no yelling, just facts. You're refusing to process a legal withdrawal, Elliot said calmly, despite having my ID, despite having my account info, and despite allowing a white customer before me to withdraw even more, with no questions asked. Wade shifted, slightly unsure now. The dynamic had changed. The phone, the recording, the evidence was a threat more powerful than any badge on his chest. I'm going to ask you again, Wade said, voice lower this time. Please step outside. Elliot looked at him, then at Clarissa. And if I don't? There was no answer. Just Wade reaching out, one hand grabbing Elliot's forearm, firm, controlled, intentional. He didn't yank. He didn't shout. But he didn't ask, either. He dragged. Elliot barely had time to adjust his footing before he was pulled toward the door, his sneakers skidding slightly on the tile, his shoulder bumping hard into Wade's frame as he was spun and pushed forward. The glass doors swung open. And just like that, he was outside. The cold morning air hit Elliot like a slap. Sharp, sudden, and more humiliating than painful. The pristine glass doors of Halstead Trust closed behind him with an unceremonious hush, like sealing off a courtroom after a conviction. Inside, everything continued as if nothing had happened. As if the man they just threw out wasn't the one who had built this place. As if his name wasn't engraved on the founding plaque just a few feet from where he now stood. Wade Peterson remained on the other side of the door, arms crossed, standing like a sentinel. His face was unreadable, but the message was clear: stay out. Elliot's ID, the very card Samantha had refused to even look at, came flying out a second later. It hit the concrete with a sharp, plastic clack, bouncing once before landing at his feet like a discarded receipt. The insult landed harder than the shove. Elliot stared down at the card, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Something boiled beneath his ribs, not rage, exactly. Not yet. But something raw. Something that had waited patiently, silently, for this moment. Not the first. Not the last. Before he could reach for the ID, another shadow fell beside his. A man crouched slowly, careful, deliberate, and picked up the card with 2 fingers. He didn't flick it. He didn't toss it. He dusted it off, like it mattered. Jalen Brooks. Late 30s. Black. Security badge on his chest. But the fatigue in his eyes had nothing to do with long hours. It was the kind of exhaustion that came from watching, over and over again, how things really worked. He stood and held the card out to Elliot. This place, Jalen muttered, just loud enough for only one man to hear. Always the same story. Elliot took the card, his fingers brushing Jalen's for a second. There was no need for thanks. The moment said enough. Jalen exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slowly. Doesn't matter if you've got the degrees, he murmured. If you dress right. If you say, yes sir, and, thank you kindly, and follow every damn rule. He looked back at the bank doors, his mouth tightening into something between resignation and fury. They still see us the same way. Elliot nodded once. Not because he agreed but because he knew. He reached into his pocket again, this time not for his ID, but his phone. He didn't open the camera. He dialed. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a crisp voice answered. "This is Carter." "David," Elliot said. "I need you at the Atlanta branch. Now." A sharp inhale on the other end. "Give me 15 minutes. Elliot ended the call. Jalen blinked. "That David Carter? From the executive board?" "Executive vice president," Elliot corrected, sliding the phone back into his pocket. Jalen let out a short, dry laugh. "Well damn." Elliot didn't answer. He didn't need to. He turned back toward the building, eyes narrowed, posture perfectly still. He was done asking. Done explaining. Done being polite in the face of polished cruelty. Inside, behind the glass, Clarissa Monroe had returned to her office. Samantha was back at the counter, tapping away on her keyboard like nothing had happened. Wade still stood guard unmoved, unbothered, unaware of the reckoning on its way. 15 minutes passed slowly. Every tick of the clock stretched like wet rope. Elaine Weller, the woman with the designer purse, stepped outside, glanced at Elliot, then quickly walked the other way. Typical. Comfortable in observation. Unwilling to confront. And then, finally, a sleek black BMW glided up to the curb. It didn't park. It stopped. And the back door flew open before the engine even shut off. David Carter stepped out. Salt and pepper hair. Dark tailored coat. A presence that silenced rooms without a word. He didn't glance at the bank. He locked eyes with Elliot first. And his expression hardened. David moved with purpose, each step slicing through tension like a hot knife. He didn't pause for the security guard. Didn't acknowledge Wade, who now straightened up, recognizing too late that this wasn't just any visitor. The doors to Halstead Trust swung open. The bank, which just minutes ago had thrown out its founder, was about to become a courtroom. Elliot followed, calm and controlled. Jalen hesitated for a second, then fell in step behind him, not as a guard anymore, but as a witness. Inside, the energy changed. Customers glanced up. Tellers froze mid-transaction. The murmur of quiet business turned into a strange, stiff hush, like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. Clarissa emerged from her office, already smoothing her blazer, already rehearsing her smile. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice poised. "I wasn't expecting." "That's clear," David cut her off sharply. "Because if you were, this wouldn't have happened." Her smile cracked. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding," David replied, his tone icy. "The only confusion I have is why my CEO was just forcibly removed from a bank with his name on the cornerstone." The air inside the lobby tightened, as if the room itself had realized it was on trial. Clarissa Monroe blinked once. Then again. The calm, polished control she had held so tightly began to slip, thread by thread. Sir, I had no idea." "You had every idea," David said, his voice cold and clinical. "You saw a black man asking for his own money and you made a decision based on everything but fact." He turned toward Samantha, who visibly paled. Her fingers, once so confident on the keyboard, trembled slightly as they hovered above the counter. "You refused his transaction?" I was following protocol," she said quickly. David raised a brow. "Which protocol is that? The one where white customers walk out with more cash and no questions? Or the one where we ignore IDs and call security when someone doesn't fit your comfort zone?" Samantha's mouth opened. No sound came out. David didn't wait for an answer. He turned to Wade, the security guard, who stood uncomfortably near the entrance, his stance suddenly less certain. And you, David said. What part of your training told you to forcibly eject someone without cause, without warning, without verifying a single thing? Wade's jaw tensed. I was instructed by management. David tilted his head. Ah. So it wasn't about safety. It was about compliance. The silence in the room deepened. Like a collective breath being held too long. David looked back to Clarissa. Did you even check his account? She inhaled sharply. Sir, Yes or no? Clarissa hesitated. That was enough. David exhaled, slow and deliberate. His gaze swept across the bank at the staff who had stood by and done nothing, the tellers who had glanced away, and the customers who pretended not to see. Then let me be clear, he said, his voice rising just enough to cut through the room like glass. Elliot Grant is not just a customer. He is not just a name on a database. He turned to Elliot. He is the founder, the owner, the vision behind this entire institution. A gasp rippled across the floor. Samantha's hand covered her mouth. Wade looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Even Clarissa's mouth fell open, eyes wide. David faced her again. And you threw him out. The words hung there. Heavy. Unforgiving. Clarissa's voice cracked when she spoke. I didn't know. You didn't care to find out, David snapped. He paused, then said the words that sealed her fate. You're done here. Clarissa's face went white. Sir, please, Effective immediately, David continued. Clean out your office. You will be escorted out. He turned to Samantha. You're on probation. Pending retraining. Full bias review. If I hear one more complaint from this location. She nodded quickly, her eyes glistening. Then David turned to Wade. Your file's going to corporate. Security protocol review. You may not be walking back into this building tomorrow. Wade dropped his gaze. Finally, David looked to Jalen. And you? Jalen straightened slightly. Sir. David studied him calm, composed, respectful even now. You're promoted, he said. Effective immediately. Jalen's eyebrows shot up. I appreciate that, but You handled yourself with integrity, David said. When no one else did. Jalen's nod was slow, stunned. Elliot hadn't spoken once. Now he did. I'd like my withdrawal processed, he said, voice steady. David turned to Samantha. Do it. She didn't argue. She tapped furiously at the keys, pulling up the account, the one she hadn't even bothered to search minutes earlier. In less than 60 seconds, she handed over the crisp, neat stacks of bills, $15,000 placed gently in front of the man she had nearly had arrested. Elliot picked up the money, but paused. He slid one stack exactly $1,000 across the counter toward Jalen. Take the rest of the day off, he said. Jalen looked at the money, then at Elliot. Sir, that's non-negotiable. Jalen swallowed hard. Thank you. Elliot turned back to Clarissa one last time. You should have checked my ID. Then he turned, calm as ever, and walked out. No one stopped him. Not this time. By the time Elliot Grant stepped outside again, the sun had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows across the city sidewalk. The wind was cooler now, not harsh, but present, brushing against his collar as if reminding him, you're still here. You're still standing. The building behind him, the one that had just tried to erase his presence, now sat under a very different kind of spotlight. Not from the sky. But from consequences. David Carter remained inside to begin the internal audit. Not the kind done with numbers, the kind done with names, faces, behavior. The kind that dug beneath policies and scraped at culture. And this time, the rot would not be ignored. Jalen Brooks emerged a moment later, no longer just a security guard, but a man with new weight on his shoulders. His uniform didn't change, but his posture did. Taller. Grounded. Respected. "Never seen anyone do what you just did," he said quietly. Elliot didn't smile. He didn't need to. Not enough people ever get the chance. Jalen nodded once. "They will now." A black SUV pulled up to the curb. Not flashy efficient. Corporate. It belonged to the internal ethics team summoned not just to investigate, but to rebuild. As Elliot walked toward it, reporters were already beginning to gather near the corner. News traveled fast in this city. Especially when it involved power, race, and humiliation served in a three-piece suit. One of the journalists, a young black woman with a camera bag slung over her shoulder, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Grant, just one question," she said, mic already in hand. "Do you intend to file a lawsuit?" Elliot paused, turned to face her. "I don't sue systems I can fix," he said plainly. "But I do dismantle the parts that are broken." She lowered her mic slowly. "What happens next?" He looked her dead in the eye. "We get to work." Over the next 3 days, Halstead Trust Bank underwent the fastest structural audit in its history. Clarissa Monroe's termination was made public. Samantha Briggs was suspended pending retraining. Wade Peterson's contract was voided after it was revealed he had a pattern of excessive force complaints internally buried under discretionary handling. But that wasn't the real story. The real shift came quietly. Inside every Halstead Trust branch across the country, employees were required to sit through new training modules, not created by HR firms but by community educators, civil rights leaders, and staff like Jalen who had experienced bias firsthand. Each employee signed a new inclusion oath. Not just words on a wall, but binding agreements tied to job security, promotion eligibility, and public accountability. A digital dashboard visible to clients displayed real-time updates on equity goals, audit scores, and employee diversity statistics. Not performative. Transparent. And then came the biggest change of all. On Monday morning, Halstead Trust launched the Grant Standard, a sweeping, bank-wide ethics reform initiative. Named after Elliot himself, it mandated random customer experience audits by third-party watchdogs, anonymous whistleblower protections, a customer council, composed of local citizens half of whom came from historically marginalized communities, and most notably, a standing seat on the executive board for a non-executive employee, voted in by peers every 2 years. It was radical. It was bold. And it shook the financial industry to its core. But for Elliot, it wasn't about headlines. It was about healing a legacy. On Friday afternoon, he stood in front of a group of interns, all of them first-generation college students, many of them students of color. He wasn't in a boardroom. Not even in a suit. Just a button-down, sleeves rolled up, and a marker in his hand as he stood by a whiteboard that read, "Power doesn't start at the top. It starts at the counter." He told them the story. Not to shame. Not to boast. But to teach. "Don't let a suit fool you," he said. "Don't let a title define you. And never ever let anyone make you feel like you need to prove your worth just to belong." A young woman in the back raised her hand. "What if it happens to us?" she asked softly. Elliot looked at her, gaze steady. "Then you do what I did," he said. "You stand your ground." That evening, as the lights in the headquarters dimmed, Elliot sat alone in his office, glass walls overlooking the city skyline. The same glass that had once hidden judgment now reflected only clarity. On his desk was a single photo, his mother, hands calloused from factory work, standing beside a 10-year-old Elliot holding a school award for Best Math Project. She had taught him that numbers didn't lie, but people sometimes did. And that the only way to rewrite the rules was to own the rulebook. He leaned back, exhaled. Then turned off the light. This chapter wasn't revenge. It was reform. In a world where perception often outweighs truth, Elliot Grant reminded us of something vital: dignity is not granted by others. It's owned. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't seek revenge. Instead, he held his ground. And in doing so, he didn't just reclaim his identity, he redefined the culture of an entire institution. Because real power doesn't come from who you are on paper, it comes from how you respond when you're dismissed, disrespected, and disbelieved. And the most powerful response is to rebuild the system that tried to silence you. Let Elliot's story be more than just a moment. Let it be a mirror, reflecting what we accept and what we need to change. Join us to share meaningful stories that challenge injustice, restore dignity, and inspire change. Hit the like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow's world starts with the truths we tell today.